Hello and welcome to this online event. My name is Steve Hardman and I'm from the Gruyter Publishers, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this digital event, Discover the Future of European Studies, Embrace the Challenges, Embrace the Opportunities. This session is being recorded and you'll find the video later on our social media channels and on the Gruyter's YouTube channel. We're going to spend about 40 minutes on a panel discussion, which will give us plenty of time for questions at the end. So if you do have any questions or observations, please can you use the chat function. This discussion today will take a particularly sociological approach. While political science is still dominant in research and teaching on Europeanization, perspectives on European society, transnational association and relations become more relevant, as does the understanding of Europe that reaches beyond the EU's borders. So it's my pleasure to introduce our two moderators for this session today, who will in turn introduce our panelists for the discussion. Sebastian Brückner is a senior lecturer of sociological theory and cultural sociology at Friedrich Alexander University, Erlangen-Nuremberg. And currently he is interim professor of macro-sociology at the University of Kassel. His research focuses on Europeanization and transnationalization processes, the sociology of knowledge and expertise, cultural sociology, changing modes of political and societal government, and regionalization in Europe. Sebastian is the author of several books, including Mobilizing Regions and Mobilizing Europe. Suzanne Borchers is a political sociologist and a senior lecturer at the European University Viadrina in Frankfurt-Oder. She works on political sociology in Europe, with a particular emphasis on post-socialist societies and Ukraine. She is the author of numerous publications on civil society, democratization, culture, diplomacy, and Europeanization. Her dissertation on external democracy promotion in Ukraine was awarded the Klaus Meinert Prize in 2016 by the German Association for East European Studies. And in 2019, she was awarded both the Brandenburg State Award for Excellent Academic Teaching and the Brandenburg Postdoc Award for Outstanding Research in the area of humanities and social sciences. Sebastian and Suzanne are co-editors of the book Sociology of Europeanization that was published by De Gruyter in 2022. The third co-editor is Monika Eichmuller, who unfortunately is not able to be with us today. Monika is based at Europa Universitat Flensburg. Their book, which provides an introduction to and an overview of current sociological studies in Europeanization, it sketches major conceptual angles and approaches to the sociology of Europeanization. It also covers a wide range of themes and topics characterizing current changes and transformation of society in Europe today. Before I hand over to Sebastian and Suzanne, I would like to say just a few words about De Gruyter. De Gruyter is based in Berlin and is one of the oldest independent publishers in Germany, with a history dating back more than 270 years. De Gruyter is a leading publisher of academic content, and in total we publish more than 1,500 new book titles each year, and we also publish journals and various digital products. Everyone attending this session today will receive an email afterwards with a link to the recording of today's event. And I'll now hand over to Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to welcome you today in this online session as well. Thank you for your warm introduction, dear Steve. And I'm very happy to speak a little bit also about our idea of the book and also of this discussion we will have today on the future of European studies. When we were first thinking about this book a couple of years ago, we had the impression that European studies need a sociological perspective and that also sociology needs a European perspective, which were both not too elaborated at that time. And so Sebastian and our wonderful co-editor Monika Eichmuller, who unfortunately cannot be here today, and me were thinking and starting discussions about what could be a real sociological perspective on European studies and how can it help to understand those sociological and social processes that we find in Europe. And of course, it's not only about the European Union, it's not only about integration, but it's also about disintegration, it's about ambivalence, it's about conflict, and all these aspects that we find in ambivalent Europeanization processes until today. When the book was finally out, it was in early 22. I have to say it was at the beginning of February 22. So our book was published on the eve of one of the biggest catastrophes that we find in Europe since 1945, basically. And of course, this made us ask that how can we contribute with a sociological perspective to all those challenges that we are heading to? So back in February 22, in the beginning of February, of course, we were not aware of the dimension that would happen in Europe with this horrible war of Russia against Ukraine. But of course, we had the impression that sociology has to say and has to do something, and has to find ideas of Europe's future and Europe's challenges. And this is exactly what we want to discuss today. How can sociology, how can European studies develop, and how can our perspective contribute to the discussion, to the study, to the practice of European studies? I'm very happy to introduce to you today two of our speakers, Tsveta Petrova and Lynn Zelle. Tsveta Petrova is a senior lecturer and political scientist at Columbia University. Her research focuses on democracy, democratization, and also democracy promotion, with a particular focus on Central and Eastern Europe. She was working on different projects on protests and civil society in Central and Eastern Europe, on social movements. And she's publishing in high-ranking scientific journals, very present at many conferences, and of course at the Columbia University. So welcome, Tsveta Petrova, and also where you also contributed to our book, so you're one of the co-authors. It is wonderful to have you here today. Lynn Zelle is an alumna of the European University Viadrina in Frankfurt Oder. She's working in the European movement in Germany and is the president of that movement. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that movement, because it combines ideas and discussions on the future of Europe and also bringing together networking on European issues. And we're very happy to have you here today as well. And now I hand over to Sebastian. Thank you.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Sebastian Büttner. I'm one of the moderators of today's session, and I have the pleasure to introduce another speaker, another panelist, which is Magdalena Gura. She's a researcher and lecturer at the Institute of European Studies at Jagiellonian University in Krakow. She concentrates in her work on very different topics of European studies, from EU neighborhood policy to the external relations of European Union, but also European identity. She has worked in various projects. I cannot name every project, but they were funded by the Polish National Science Center, the Norwegian Financial Mechanism, but also Horizon 2020 program. And she published and she co-edited a book which might be relevant for our today's session on expertization and democracy in Europe with colleagues 2018 with Routledge. So Magda, Lena, very nice that you join us. And finally, I would like to introduce Didier Georgakis. He is professor of political science at University Paris 1, Panthéon and Sorbonne, where he holds a chair, Jean Monnet chair, and he is also coordinator of a master program. In addition, he is also professor at the Collège de France in Bruges, and he is the academic coordinator of the European General Studies program, so it's also very relevant for our discussion today. Next to these affiliations, I should also mention that he is a member of the European Center for Sociology and Political Science in Paris, which is linked to the EHISS and the CNRS. And in his research, he focuses on, and that's where we know each other, on professionals in the area of EU affairs and transdisciplinary perspectives on EU integration and the emergence of transnational fields One or two books I should mention is The Field of Bureaucracy, published with J. Rowan in 2013, and The Euro Civil Service in Times of Crisis, The Changing Power of Bureaucrats. I will leave the introduction of our panelists here. So also very welcome, Didier, to our session. And not to lose time so much with introductions and so on, I would now directly go to the first part of our discussion of the panel. And I would like to ask like 3 questions to everybody, and maybe Didier, it would be nice if you would start. So one question is, what is your personal impression, your personal take also on European studies? How do you perceive it? What do you think is the role of sociology in European studies at the moment? And if you like, what are your main impressions about the book that we edited? You don't have to praise too much, but of course we are looking forward to your perspective. And then I would also ask the others to step in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sebastian. Thanks a lot. Just a little precision. I belong to the College of Europe, not the College of France. Although I'm very inspired by Pierre Bourdieu, I'm not in the College, but the one of Europe. So, precisely, I would say that I'm somewhere in the middle of political science, sociology, and history, and really inspired by the work of Pierre Bourdieu, Norbert Elias, and some other where I think across discipline. And this is important for my vision of European studies, because I think that European studies actually presents a sort of double face. One can have, first of all, or as a sort of a priori, the vision of a very interdisciplinary field, and interdisciplinarity is really in every mouth. But in reality, there is a sort of sharp division in, I think, 4 areas. At the scholar level, as you say, there is a sort of huge division between EU politics, which is quite dominant, in the US as well as in most European countries. And on the other side, you have European studies as a sort of divided mix: history, anthropology, sociology, philosophy, and something like. And I think that at the professional level, you have something which is even different, which is a sort of huge division between economics and law, which is the main basis for people working with around the institution. So my feeling is that although there is a strong image of interdisciplinarity, we have mainly separate tables, with, of course, the strong exception of the Council for European Studies, and fortunately some book series such as the one led by Rouza and Trends, for instance, against the political, about the political sociology. But to this extent, I think that sociology, I fully share the point that you had in the beginning, and Suzanne says. I think that sociology has a major role to play as a sort of point of articulation between disciplines. But the thing is that the discipline of sociology did not sufficiently invest in the nexus between the European construction and societies. I mean, and this is true on both sides, meaning how social issues, social integration in a sort of Durkheimian vision, or domination in the Weberian sense, shape the European construction, and how this later has an effect on society and on the potentiality to integrate societies at a regional level. This is really, for me, sociology has a role And really, your book from this perspective is really important, because this is one of the rare taking seriously the subject of the sociology of Europeanization as such, but also from different perspective of sub-object or sub-subject, if I can say. So this is timely and more than useful, and I think this is the case both for research and also to teach. I'm not going to be long, even if French, a wordy French, but I would say that when I started my courses on the sociology of European construction at the College of Europe 15 years ago, there was nothing to refer actually, and it is more or less it has still been the case so far before your book. And I think that with your book, we have for the first time a sort of overview of major issues, and something quite rare. It is also that your book is as a sort, additionally, a sort of didactic form, and this is really a wonderful. This is absolutely a wonderful idea. Why? You have abstract of main concepts, main data, and so on. So this is really important, because it means that you do not need to be a sociologist to read it, which is helpful for students, but also for people coming from other disciplines that don't know anything about sociology. And I think that thanks to your book, they are going to have an access, or they will be able to have an access if they want to include something which is truly interdisciplinary, or if they want to jump into the reasoning of sociology of Europe. And I think that this is really a good idea, and something which is rare. And this is also the case for the professionals, when people working in the institutions or people working around, because economists, lawyers, and political scientists, they all have their handbook, something short, sharp, etc. And it did not existed before your book for sociology. So this is really, I mean, this is very useful, and this is timely, and particularly, as we said before, in this context of turbulence that we know too much. So really, thank you for the book, and this is genuine. There is no publicity. This is true. Well done.
Thank you very much, Didier. Magdalena, may I ask you to share your impression? And I mean, you don't have to respond, or if you like, you should not respond to each of the questions. Maybe you describe your take on European studies, and what your impression is, what is missing here, and what the role of sociology is in this context.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'll start with telling you that I'm a political scientist, and of course that brings me in a position of a kind of kind of external commentator, if you wish, on sociology. But through the way I actually encounter European studies is exactly what is the most important to me personally aspect of how we understand European studies, because I was at the end of my MA in political science, and I joined, that was end of 90s, and I joined the team of sociologists who were doing a research on Polish society, opinions and visions and perceptions of European integration. That was, at the more or less beginning of the process of negotiations before joining the EU, and they were interested to see, what the Polish society and various groups are saying. And through that, research that I joined, I've learned how enriching it is when you actually join the topic from and look at it from a variety of perspectives. And, you know, as a result, I ultimately joined the back then it was Interdisciplinary Center for European Studies that was created at Jagiellonian University in 1993. That was actually specifically interested in bringing people from different disciplines in order to create a platform of research and intellectual reflection on what is Europe, what is European integration. And we sort of, until today, I'm still working at the same place with different, developments on the way. But we are still true to the original idea of bringing together people from variety of disciplines and just having this constant, enriching exchange between scholars, sort of while we study fairly similar phenomena. In the end of the day, if you actually look at my publications, I think almost everything that I published with co-author, I published with sociologists. And that is also proving that, working together is actually making things more interesting, but also it allows us to kind of capture this dynamic from the day one on this sort of multi-perspective approach. And that brings me to something that I think is really the beauty of the European studies. And it was back when I was starting, and it is today. And it's, Johan P. Olsen, who actually is a political scientist as well, but, one of this, most important figures in European studies, in one of his recent books said that, European integration, European Union, all the processes that are happening here can be treated as this unique laboratory that you can actually see things that we want to know about, some, ways we develop social structures, we, reshape the fundamental behaviors of people, and looking in Europe, actually study this in something like almost laboratory conditions. And I think this is something that for me is exactly where I want to locate myself with my fellow sociologist colleagues with whom I work on a daily basis, is that through that perspective, we basically enriching our view on European integration. And that brings me to the point that it also links to some other participants in this panel, is that if you're doing this from a perspective in Poland, and I already mentioned the beginning of the story is basically overlapping with the European integration of Poland, right? So it's basically showing in some ways, I have this feeling that I was witnessing things, but I also witness what happens now, which is basically de-Europeanization, this process of detangling some of the constructions that I was witnessing when they were, entangled in a way. And I think this also shows very interestingly the kind of sort of short time span in which we somehow see the changes that are happening here. And then again, for me, what the sociologist perspective is helping me as political scientist, and your book in general is useful for us to instruct students, make them sensitive on those issues, is also the way how methodologically we can see where these changes are happening, and that you just need to go beyond this sort of institutional level to see where many of the things are actually located, or that there is a kind of aspects that are behind the institutional, for instance, aspect of it. So in the end of the day, even though I'm actually mostly teaching classes on political science, foreign policy, as you said, Sebastian, I think every time we actually go to the literature that tries to capture, and Didier, you've mentioned already the book by colleagues on political sociology of European integration, that was written earlier. These are the textbooks in political science classes on European integration, because we cannot understand it without it. So your book is a contribution to it, and it's a very important, and valuable resource for allowing students to kind of embrace this multidisciplinary connection early on in their education. Because I think from personal perspective that this is really the only way to go if you really want to understand what happens on European continent. Thanks.
Thank you, Magdalena, for bringing up this notion of like detangling Europe, and or like the deconstruction of Europe, so to speak. I would now go to Lynn and ask her. You have both the experience of the academic world of European studies, but you are also a practitioner, if I may call you like that. What is your take on European studies?
Okay, I hope you can hear me. I just had a bit of a hiccup. But yeah, indeed. So I wouldn't consider myself any longer well, of course, I have my academic uprising, and I studied led by Susanne and others European studies, but I mostly have a political science background, and yeah, since 10 years more or less I work in politics, so I have this practitioner's view, as you said, and my perspective is that I work on European politics and policies, but based in Berlin. So a lot of my work is also looking at the German EU policy and how that works and how that doesn't work. And I think here especially a sociological perspective is also very interesting, and also what we already know about the bureaucrats, if I may call them so, or the notion of expertise, and how this technocratic sphere of EU politics also shapes political results. This is something that I learned more and more in the past years, that we I think sometimes also have to look away or beyond the mere sphere, the political sphere, and dig a bit deeper into what is going on at the technocratic level. And I think here sociology has a great role to play, because you can explain also similarities and differences between in this transnational field. So I remember from my studies the notion of the political field. So I was very happy to read an article in your book about that, because I think this is specifically what sociology can bring us in understanding this European political field. Because I think if we only look at it from a political science perspective, this notion of intergovernmentalism, transnationalism, supranationalism, this is one part of the explanation. But I think we are so interconnected nowadays that we have to look deeper and look at what are the people shaping political processes, and this goes on so many levels. So I think there is a great role sociology can play in there from my viewpoint, which, as I said, is a bit far away from the pure academic sphere. I think this is still underlooked. Also, what like these transnational elements. Also, for example, the Collège d'Europe as an institution forming the European elite, European and national elites. I think this is very interesting. And maybe one more notion. Susanne said in the beginning about this deep rift that we see since February 2024 of last year. And I think if we look from today's perspective, we see a major rift between the West European and the Central and Eastern European societies on how we responded to the war politically. It's also a question of trust, specifically with vis-a-vis Germany. Can we still trust Germany? This is what I hear a lot from Poland, from other Central European countries. And the question, how did this happen? What role the past 20 years have? What role also the societies and the political elites have? I think this is also deeply sociological. Yeah, I think that would be then for the second volume of your book to pay attention to that. But yeah, I found it deeply interesting. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lynn. And I was waiting for Sveta as the last person of our panel, because she is the co-author of the book. And so I wanted to give the others the floor first to talk about their perspectives. But Sveta, you are located in New York. You teach European studies in the US context. Is there something specific about that and something you would like to add to what was said before?
Thank you. I wanted to take a somewhat more both personal and big picture view and come back to an idea that Suzanne introduced briefly, that in a way we live in a moment which feels like an inflection point in history, especially in the wake of the pandemic and then the Russia's invasion in Ukraine back to back. And at the same time, kind of looking more broadly, it feels to me that there are a number of big changes that are reshaping Europe, but the world more broadly. Thinking about the natural environment and the speeding up of various environmental disasters and catastrophes that are in turn interacting with aging societies and migration flows that are perceived as bigger and more impactful than before. Turning towards the economy, where we are seeing a speeding up of the digitization of both the economy and the society. And it feels like we are moving in a fourth, in what some have called the fourth industrial revolution. And finally, that of course has generated tremendous changes and social upheaval that is trickling up into politics in various ways, where democracy as a hegemonic political order in Europe, in the Euro-Atlantic space, and of course, somewhat more broadly, is now challenged from within, but also from abroad, from the rise of China, and countries in the developing world, which are experimenting with alternative models of political organization. So we're really seeing these changes, what feel like tremendous changes in our natural environment, within the society, the economy, and the politics, and they're interacting in really interesting ways that are reshaping the social fabric. And so I think having a sociological perspective in this moment to understand how social hierarchies and social power are changing is really important. And in a way, looking forward beyond the book, I feel excited for the many new challenges that we as sociologists or political sociologists have, and many of the new insights that we can begin to create going forward if we were to focus on some of these changes in Europe, but again, Europe in the context of the rest of the world as well.
Thank you, Sveta. I would now like to get to the second round of questions to the panel. I would kindly ask to also think about the time, since we don't want to overstretch our time limit, but I would like to ask Didier at first, because you have this background of European studies, especially focusing on the so-called bureaucracy, on EU affairs professionals. Coming from this research background, what do you think are like 3 or 4 major central topics for the future of European studies that should be addressed?
So thank you. This is huge, but I'm also one of the founder of the European Alliance for Social Sciences and Humanities in 2015, and one of the ones who defend the SSH budget in Horizon 2020 and who pushed the topics democracy and social transformation into Horizon Europe, which is now the cluster 2. And this is funded with 2 billion euro. So that gives you a clear idea of the topic I found essential, because this is not for me as a researcher, but collectively, I mean, as researchers, as sociologists, also as people. So, but you asked me to speak about my area. I must say that, Lynn, thank you, because you paved the way for what I had to say, so to some extent. What I would like to say, and particularly for a public of sociologists, this is really do not let the study of institution to the specialist of institutions, meaning people that are explaining institution by institution. So do not let the machinery of technocracy to technocrats. So we have really something to do on this. And of course, for me, given all what we said about the current transformations that are huge, actually, indeed, I think that the question of authority and power, both authority within and over the institution, but also of the European institutions themselves, are really important, because unfortunately these questions are usually or often constructed from a narrow manner. You know, in political science, you have this sort of input, throughput, output legitimacy, and wow, this is very formal, actually, and not in relation with phenomena of social domination. So, to my view, according with the question of Europeanization, this is how Europeanization changed power and authority, and this is really a major issue in this context of profound social changes. That would be something. So, in the same vein, of course, I think that deepening the sociology of elites and broadly the sociology of the professional of Europe is really important, because this is people in sort of intermediary positions that are the sort of mediators between societies and the political sphere, and also the economic sphere, actually. So this is really important to continue to understand better how they translate what they feel about the social transformation into the field of power, and the contrary. Of course. So this is something important, and in a way which is very close, I think that the question of fields, there is a sort of avenue for us with the theory of fields. You know that even the big Ernst Haas said, he was referring to the work of Flickstein, but said that the field theory was the major thing that happened in the field of European studies as he knew it. And this is important, because this is Ernst Haas. And I think that, empirically speaking, there is still a lot to do, really, to understand I don't know if there is an integration of field, but at least the transnationalization of field, and what part Europe play into these fields, and how they are connected together, because you have interstitial fields, transnational field, but also very national or local field. And I think that we can really understand the social transformation only with this concept. So I could be long. I don't want to be long, but I think that there are a lot of methodology. But what I would like to say, this is two more things shortly. The first one is, I think that we are indeed in the context of huge transformation, huge social transformation, because this is the growth. This is finished, or the one we knew I think that this is finished, probably. And of course, the digital market, which is constructed, is going to transform everything. Including, of course, the sociability between the people, the network of solidarity, everything is going to change. So I think that in this particular context, we are in the same situation that the sociologists at the end of the 19th century were, actually, like Durkheim, like Weber, Marx, or the one you choose. It doesn't matter, but the question of how to build new solidarities in this new world, I think that should be one of the way on what the sociologists really should reflect. And the last one is that maybe we are ending a period of neoliberalism. Maybe, we don't know, actually. And I think that that will be really important to make a break, a radical break with the theory of consumers that many people in the field of bureaucracy has in mind. And maybe this is the time to bring social class back in European studies, because what we are going to assist is a really huge transformation. So there is some work for sociologists, I think.
Thank you, Didier. Good to know that there will be still enough work for us for the future, but I want to hand over to Lynn right now. We just heard that one of the core tasks of not only sociologists but for Europeans might be building solidarity in what you call, Didier, a new world, a new Europe. And dear Lynn, since you are working on European politics, on European policies, both in your professional work as in your work as a honorary president of the European movement, you have the task of bringing exactly that together. I have the impressions of bringing civil society, European institution, European policies together, but they all have very different interests and very different ways. So, what would you say? What are core tasks for European studies and for your work on Europe as well?
Yeah, many, but I really do agree on what Didier has said on this question of elites. And I think the more, so in my work for the European movement, I work a lot also transnational and within social movements. I come back to that in a second, but in my professional life, I work for a German land, so the regional level, and their European positions here in Berlin. And I think it's very interesting to look more on the role that national elites or like the bureaucracy plays, or what influence they have on the course of European integration and their Europeanness, if I may say so, in a very non-technical way, because I feel more and more, I said it in the beginning, the impact that these national levels, of course, formally have in the Council of Ministers and so on, but their power also in giving away to then formal decisions is very important. And I think this is like from the daily work I have, this is one of my major struggles personally as well, to see like how can we Europeanize those working on the ground on European affairs, also those not only working on European affairs in the ministries of interior, ministries for justice, all those all ministries basically have a huge Europeanization in the past 20 years. But maybe coming back to my role in the European movement. So the German European movement is a organization of organizations. So our members are associations, industry, so companies, but also youth organizations, environmental organizations, basically the whole sphere of the civil society, social forces in Germany, on European affairs. And I think here also the question of how do those transnational networks kind of build ties, obviously, in this non-political sphere, how they build ties and how they foster also European integrations through their exchanges. And this can be the industry associations who work a lot with their European counterparts, and it can be the youth organization who are super Europeanized, and maybe what factors contribute to different types of social forces being more or less Europeanized. So I think on this like sub-political European networks, I think this would be also, from my very personal perspective, very, very interesting to look into that in more detail.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I would like to ask Magdalena if you could say like some words about your perspective of the future of European studies from your background, studying especially the link between democracy and maybe capacity building, strengthening of democracy and civil society through European studies.
Thank you very much. And it's actually very interesting questions, because we are, for me personally, because we are just finalizing a project that is called EU3D. It's a Horizon 2020 project. It's about differentiation, dominance, and democracy. And what we do is we basically look at the various actors, among other things, of course, how various actors, from political actors through social actors, also those located in sort of in the mainstream, but also on the fringes of a scale, up to the citizens, how do they perceive the future of European integration? So a future of Europe more generally. So it's for me, it's a kind of daily issue to look how various actors are actually, thinking about what's ahead of us, not only ahead of us scholars of European studies, but also of us living in the European continent. And actually, not only it is the case that we use the concepts that are sociological concepts, particularly differentiation or dominance. And I think that you already mentioned the dominance in some, or domination. It depends on whose writing you are referring to, but in the end of the day, this somehow is interconnected. These are, the concepts that were a long time ago developed by sociological, powerhouses, intellectual powerhouses, and then we employ them today to understand what exactly we are actually discussing about, how to understand these transformations that are globally happening, and then how do they influence the way, variety of actors are actually thinking about what would happen to this, uncertain, undetermined construction that we build, and we keep building in European continent, known as European Union. And I think, for us, for instance, dominance primarily means the unjust exercise of power. And we actually, instead of looking at how people are criticizing European Union, we actually ask them, or people, different actors, we actually analyze how do they see this sort of problematic aspect of power relations within the political system. And we ask them subjectively, we look at both objective, actually instances of that kind of dominance, but also ask them like, so what do you think is happening there? Is there any dominance in the field? And they can tell you, and it is interesting what they tell you. What is interesting in our recent paper, Who's Dominating Whom, that you can read online on our website, we actually saw that dominance is perceived not only by the usual suspect, like Eurosceptic populist, actors, but also by the proponents, and also strong proponents of European integration. And they see this unjust exercise of powers within the European political system. But those actors, the proponents of European integration, they say, the member states are still dominating EU. They're not allowing EU to do what the EU institution would like to do. Would that be in the field of migration and refugee? Would that be in the field of gender equality? It's like they are still dominated. Well, of course, the other side would say, no, it's EU who is dominating. It's a bureaucrat, it's an ideological project, and so on and so forth. In the end of the day, you kind of need this sociological perspective, it seems to me, to kind of shed the light on things that may actually tell you something more about the process overall. Just one short word on the future in a way. So we just are finalizing. So of course, there is some findings, and one of the interesting findings, of course, that it's difficult to say whether the future of European integration is going to be more federalized or more intergovernmental. What we actually find out that is quite interesting is that there are actually also new narratives that are sort of popping out, and they are growingly becoming more coherent. They're growingly becoming sort of more relevant, and they are linked both to the things like Brexit. So many of the radical critics of European integrations are actually not able to say, okay, so let's leave the club. They don't want to do it, but they want to radically transform European integration into something that is almost antithesis of the project in itself. And they are actually doing pretty well within the European integration. And that is another interesting question to see what would happen if this, some people are calling it far-right sovereignism, is actually getting growing, popularity and acceptance by citizens. And I'll end with this to somehow relate to what Lynn said. Is we also found out that the critical stories, critical narratives of European integrations are actually getting more proactive in a way, because it's actually very difficult somehow for the proponents to defend the project that is there, while it's much easier and it gets a certain resonance among citizens is to criticize it. And I think there is also something to look at, is like, it's not easy to kind of revert this dynamic that you can see in many national contexts, is that the critics, even though they lack consistency, depth of arguments, but they actually are sort of kind of becoming dominant in and sort of set the frames for the discussion about particular issues and how to revert it. And again, I think there is a lot of place and space to study for sociological, political science, and many other disciplines' perspective to really wrap our mind around it and maybe propose some solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Magdalena. Sveta, you've been working on populism, and I would say also on the popularization of populism, in particular in Eastern Europe, since a couple of years already. I would like to ask you, we do not have a polarization. When we were speaking about polarization and conflicts in Europe, we were thinking about, for example, populist movements and de-democratization. Now we have a war in Europe and a huge rupture. What does that mean from a transatlantic perspective, but also from a Eastern European perspective for the future of European studies? And please be a little bit brief, because we're running out of time.
Yeah, I actually think that some of the important topics for us to keep researching and teaching forward are similar to the ones that my colleagues already mentioned. And I think the question of both democracy and democratization are really critical, both to the study of Europe, but also to the future of Europe. And it's in part because, as you mentioned, we have these movements and governments, ethno-populist movements and governments, that are really challenging the European project. And that in part picks up on a research theme that we've had for a while, which is that of the European democracy deficit. And so given the challenges and this continuing perception of a democratic deficit of the EU level, yet that's paired with, in many countries, many groups, growing trust in the EU and institutions and its effectiveness, I think we need to do a lot more to reconcile the two. Returning back to the question of ethnopopulism is another question of the democratization of the EU, but this time more spatially. I think that in a way, it's critical for us to understand and to come to terms with this existence of a second-class citizens. And these oftentimes are not just groups, social groups in a society, but these are oftentimes the colonial subjects of the European countries, starting from the old European empires to the more recent Eastern European countries, which oftentimes think themselves as post-colonial subjects. So understanding and finding a way to give these second-class citizens more rights and more opportunities to be engaged and to participate in equal ways, I think is critical for the future of Europe. And then again, somewhat relatedly, and obviously for addressing the resilience of ethnopopulism in Eastern but also Western Europe. And then the final related threat, which again is under the rubric of democratization, but this time in the European neighborhood, I think is the question of external threats to democracy, misinformation, foreign influence. I think we still have a lot of work to do to understand these pressures and how they're filtered from the bottom up to the political system, how pervasive they are, and what are some of the ways in which they can be managed, again, for the sake of continued European integration.
Thank you, Sveta. Thank you all for your wonderful contributions. We heard a lot of challenges that are ahead of us for European studies. I would like also to talk about the opportunities that we should embrace, but unfortunately, this might be a topic rather for the next session, or we will continue this debate on opportunities of European studies anywhere else. So thank you so much for the discussion to here, and I'd like to give the word to Steve right now.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's some really interesting discussion there, and I think there's so many important issues. I feel we were just scratching the surface, and I think, as you say, Suzanne, there's plenty of opportunity for further discussion there. So I'd like to thank Suzanne and Sebastian for moderating this session today, so thank you very much. And Didier, Magdalena, Sveta and Lynn, thank you very much for your contributions as panelists. There's some really interesting points there. And I would like to thank everybody for joining as well. So thank you all very much, and goodbye.